Hello, everybody, and welcome to episode number 6 of the Multi-Cloud Expedition. Super excited for today's show because we've got tremendous industry experts, and we've also got great product demonstrations. As always, I like to kick off the show by level setting on a couple of things. Number one, our Multi-Cloud Expedition series is a series where we go through the different challenges that customers are having in the multi-cloud. So what is the multi-cloud? How do we define that? Let's go ahead and put up the visual there. So what we found from our customers is they are now using, or 87% of them are using 2 or more clouds today. That means they're using a hyperscaler, maybe a second hyperscaler. They've, of course, got on-premises capabilities, as well as capabilities all the way out through the edge. So in each of those different clouds, there is complexity, the complexity of running governance, of running security, of different application development environments. So this is the multi-cloud environment. And really, this is a 10 to 15 year trend, probably, that will go out in perpetuity, by where every customer, every business organization, I should say, that needs to achieve business outcomes from their IT infrastructure will be using a multi-cloud environment. So where are customers today? We can advance to the next picture. There we go. So many customers, many organizations started out cloud first. Woohoo! They jumped into the cloud, maybe into Amazon or into Microsoft Azure. And before they knew it, they started to kind of lose some of their operational efficiency and descend into what customers have self-described as cloud chaos. Our guest, who will join us in just a few minutes, describes it as hitting the complexity wall, right? This wall of complexity that actually slows down the capabilities of IT. So although you've got greater choice, that greater choice in different clouds also comes with greater complexity. So this series is designed, we go to the next slide, to help you through VMware cross-cloud services get to Cloud Smart, and Cloud Smart being the ability to run the right app in the right cloud as efficiently as possible for the best return on investment. So let's do a quick recap. Go on to the next slide. As I mentioned, this is episode number 6, but we had 5 fantastic episodes before, beginning with how do you increase developer velocity in the multi-cloud environment, then covering the basics of cost, observability, and security, on through to governance of those multi-cloud environments, then looking at really specific security capabilities in the multi-cloud, as well as how to recover from ransomware attacks on demand. And then last episode was looking at the challenges of mergers and acquisitions. When a merger acquisition is in process or goes through, how do you handle the multi-cloud environment that gets absorbed into the organization? Hit that QR code. You'll be able to go and journey through all those different episodes, depending on which one is most relevant to you. All right. Let's go ahead and give a quick agenda for today, because it is a fantastic show. So focusing really today on modernizing the data center. And we're going to begin with an industry expert who's going to provide that insight to us, someone who's well published in the multi-cloud. We'll get to him in a minute. Then we'll dive down into specific customer challenges that we've heard, looking at operational efficiency, as well as rapid innovation and development. And we'll go through some product demonstrations that will help achieve both of those for customers. This is a live broadcast, so we very much encourage participation. Wherever you are, you're welcome to chime in. That's always popular on the engagement, is to hear folks and where they're from. But even more important, if you've got questions for any of the guest speakers or on any of the products or capabilities that you see today, please drop them in chat for 2 reasons. Number one, we've got a number of folks on the line, and they will actually be manning the chat and hopefully, where they can, answer those directly. Then at the end, we'll bring back the guest speakers so that they can answer those questions live that will collate at the end of the program. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm going to get started by welcoming a fantastic guest from Deloitte. David Linthicum. I feel like David needs no introduction because he's got a huge following. However, I know I won't be able to do it justice. So maybe David, share a little bit about your expertise in the multi-cloud.
Yeah, Dave Linthicum, Chief Cloud Strategy Officer at Deloitte. My focus is on complex distributed systems, namely multi-cloud computing, how the architectures are evolving, where the future is looking in terms of how we're going to leverage this technology successfully. Do a lot of writing and speaking. I do the InfoWorld blog. Just published a book called An Insider's Guide to Cloud Computing, and do a lot of things like this where I get to talk to people who are trying to figure out this space. It's great to be here.
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, you've been in the multi-cloud world forever and talking about it forever. So for many customers, it's probably newer for them, right? That, oh my gosh, now they've got this multi-cloud environment, but you've seen so much over the course of your years. So beginning kind of with that, what are some of the biggest challenges that you see that customers are facing, and how has it changed over the last year?
Yeah, the challenge is starting to increase, and that's the complexity challenge. So what's occurred is multi-cloud typically happens to them. They don't necessarily make a plan to move into multi-cloud. And so they're building different systems for different reasons at different times, what seemingly is the best of breed technology. So they have an abundance of choice. They can provision things pretty much at the speed of need. And they're able to fire up lots of different cloud services and applications and data stores and all these things that are existing within the enterprise that they turn over to IT operations, and they have to operationalize these systems. And that's the biggest concern right now. They don't necessarily have the budgets and time, the budgets that they need and the resources they need to operationalize these very complex systems. Keep in mind that we're spending a lot more on operations in the cloud, almost 2.5 times as much as we did with some of the on-premise systems. And those are figures that are coming back from surveys that I'm seeing from other analyst groups. So it's a huge challenge right now in our ability to, in essence, mitigate the complexity into something that's more easy to operate. We're looking to, move into some sort of a state where we can understand how to optimize those environments. So we're not necessarily reinventing the wheel, remove some of the redundancy out of the system, and really go to making these things easier to govern and easier to secure. One of the downsides of having overly complex systems and overly complex deployments is that security has a tendency to be a much more higher risk because they can't keep up with the complexity to configure the technology in a way that's going to reduce the risk of being hacked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that complexity, you call it the complexity wall, right? Or when we asked our customers, surveyed them, and we said, what does it feel like for you in this multi-cloud world? They described it as cloud chaos. But either way, they're trying to figure out ways to increase that. How do they, if they got themselves into it, as you mentioned, unexpectedly, right? And that's kind of interesting because that's where the mergers and acquisitions sometimes brings that together, or lines of businesses that just launch somewhat autonomously in order to get something to market very, very quickly. The cost is really interesting because that at 2.5 times, there's got to be some sticker shock. And I think you had mentioned that in many cases, the customers you're talking to have kind of done a faceplant when it comes to how do I handle this cost, as well as how do I handle the complexity. So, on that, what kind of advice do you have for customers? What's one of the things that they should really focus on in trying to uncover, how to get that under control?
The best advice is think strategically about how you're leveraging your technology. It's certainly one thing to be as innovative as possible and launch different domains that are building aspects of your system, which is where we're going to take the business moving forward. But ultimately, you have to have the ability to have centralized command and control and how these things are going to work. It's one thing to build a multi-cloud. You need to do so within a framework of understanding and also a framework of commonality where you're leveraging common services to mitigate the complexity. So one of the mistakes that everybody makes is they go ahead and let something happen to them, based on the organic growth of the business. And there really needs to be a vision and some sort of a control system that in place where people are coming together on what this thing really means and how it's going to solve particular business problems, and ultimately how we're going to build it and run it in something that's going to be a lot more operationally efficient. So it's not going to cost 2.5 times as amount to operate. it should cost about the same, if not a little less, than what it costs to run on some of the on-premise systems, and the ability to think through security and think through governance and things like that. Of course, everybody may push back on that. They say, well, that's, kind of paralysis through analysis. Not really. And I understand we operate in an agile space, and I understand we operate in independent pods, but there needs to be some sort of a centralized strategy that everybody seems to be moving to, that they can recite, that they can understand. And as they're building and deploying these systems, they're understanding how to get to this commonality. They're understanding how to remove repeating patterns and redundant technology. They understand that it's good to have heterogeneity, but it has to be managed in a certain way where you're mitigating the impact and the complexity, typically using automation and abstraction. So it gets down to kind of fundamental things I think we learned, 30 years ago within IT. IT first started out different divisions in the organization. We're building different things, different budgets, things like that. So it created an IT organization to centralize the strategy because that stuff was so expensive. Now we're kind of running into the same wall. We have an abundance of choice, and we're building these systems. And now we have to have a plan. We have to have a vision as to what we're going to do with it.
When we look at, from VMware standpoint, we've kind of defined 6 areas, and I'd be interested to hear your feedback on this. 6 areas that customers should look at in establishing a vision, right? Establishing common services. The first one being anything related to application development, right? So that's number 1. Then we think about the multi-cloud from the operating model management, any form of management and cost. Then thinking about infrastructure and how infrastructure can be utilized from on-prem out through hyperscalers and to the edge. Then a security dimension, then any kind of end user access to it. Then the 6 would be data, thinking about data. So curious if that matches with some of your thinking, or if you have a different perspective on how, setting visions in different pieces.
No, I think that's spot on. You're getting to the generalities that you need to, really kind of build a vision and doing it, looking at the information, looking at the data, how it's going to be stored, the application workloads, the business requirements behind that, the ability to look at the efficiency and how you're going to operationalize these systems, having some thought process that gets around that. It's really actually not very complex of an answer. I think if we, took IT professionals, 20 of them in a room, and we told them to go, think of what you need to do to make these things more operationally efficient, they would probably write down similar things. But the thing is, you got to actually do it. It's one thing to have it as a security parameter, another thing to have is operationalizing of the systems. But what's happening now is people are reacting tactically as we're starting to add these systems. So they have to do security and operations on a particular cloud provider that they just added because they want an AI system that's bound to that cloud provider they're looking to use. Well, you have to have the ability to, you're normally going to leverage, they're going to try to leverage native systems to make that happen. And so we do an operation system for one native cloud provider, security for another native cloud provider using whatever native tools that are there. We multiply that times every cloud provider that we have. And normally there's more than 1 or 2 that are leveraged. Suddenly we have 20 tools that we have to keep experts around learning how to maintain them. We have to maintain them within silos. There's no common ways and common mechanisms in dealing with security in many instances, or operations in many instances. And that's where we get the complexity wall. That's where they hit it. They just say, we can't spend any more money. We can't spend any more time. We got to figure out some better way to manage these systems in such a way we're mitigating the complexity, we're reducing the risk. And the way I like to say it, we're dealing with complexity on our terms, not the terms of the complexity of the system. So it's a matter of taking control and stopping the madness. And if you're in a hole, stop digging.
Now, in order to get out of that hole, have you seen it more? And I can totally envision this, right? It's almost like the plane is flying, right? It's the old, that old analogy. And at the same time, they're developing new capabilities on the plane, but that new capability requires special skills in order to maintain it. And then they try to hand it off to operations. And before you know it, you have this giant thing that can barely get off the ground. So to fix that, is that then become a mandate? Is it a mandate? Hey, we have to have, let's go back to those 6 areas, best practices, guardrails for application development, whether it occurs on-prem or in the cloud, or so how are organizations that are highly complex and have got all this chaos now, What do you recommend that they do in order to kind of go back to that rapid innovation they were looking for?
Yeah, great question. The reality is that if you're doing a mandate, you're forcing people in a direction, you're failing. You're not doing something correctly. So this needs to be some sort of compelling event where we're working on something that everybody can agree upon. And that doesn't mean creating committees to design systems. It's never a good idea, but we have agreed upon centralization of control, the ability to deal with data, the ability to deal with security, the ability to deal with governance, those sorts of things in a common way, shape, or form that everybody more or less agrees with and agrees to adhere to, and also understands the value of doing it, because we're moving to more optimized systems. They're going to bring much more value back to the business if we start doing this stuff in this particular ways. So you don't mandate anything. Governance, people always get freaked out about that. That does not mean hitting people in the head because they're not using the right operating system or the right database. It means the ability to adhere to a common set or a common framework where we're putting volatility into a domain. So in other words, what we're telling them, you can go out and use whatever technology you need to use as long as there's a viable business case to make it happen, to build the application in the most optimized state so we can innovate the business in a faster way. However, we have to adhere to certain commonalities and certain ways of doing so. And in many instances, it's going to be abstracted away from them. So they're going to turn the reins over to the operations team. The operations team is going to leverage a multi-cloud management tool, operations tool, things like that. They're going to be able to remove a lot of the complexity from them having to deal with it. So they're dealing with the complexity through automation and abstraction. So we're letting the tool do the work. And if you do that correctly, that's the way it should look. But we have to do it for security, you have to do it for governance, things like that. This, whole meta cloud, super cloud, stuff is really about that. It's the ability to put this management layer, this abstraction layer above the existing components, and having technology that's able to handle the commonalities, able to work cross-cloud. And I think that's where we're moving right now as quickly as we can. That's a huge space of growth based on the fact that this is like back pain. Everybody has it.
Mm-hmm. When we were talking, you had mentioned the biggest problem, right? We just talked about in the show is having that vision, right, for what to achieve the outcomes that customers are looking for from their IT environment. Related to that, I would imagine maybe this is where it gets tough. Is number one, you got to have a vision, but then part two is executing on it. So kind of curious if you've seen that, both sides of that too, that you walk in and there's customers that are just, they're in chaos, right? Because there was no vision. And there's other ones who have a beautiful vision, but then execution doesn't happen. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Vision, yes, but execution, why isn't it happening? Or how can folks be helped in that area?
Well, again, if they're not executing on a vision, then either the vision's flawed or you've done a poor job communicating it to it. So I don't view that as the fault of the people who are not moving to execute the vision. There has to be some sort of value that they're leveraging. We're making their jobs easier. It's exciting. They're excited about how to leverage this technology. So everybody has to define their own value as it comes into the system and the role that they play. And how you execute really isn't going to change a great deal because, again, we're finding commonalities of systems. We're not forcing people to build systems in the same way. We're not saying, okay, everybody has to, build a system using Python because that's their standard. What we're saying is build the technology and build the system using whatever technology you need to do, programming languages, AI systems, databases, things like that. We're going to adapt and accommodate that system. However, when we build these systems, we need to understand that we're going to be part of a larger ecosystem. We're going to work and play well in that ecosystem, and it's your job to make that happen. And we can show you how to be successful doing that, even remove a lot of the work or a lot of the risk associated with it, and make a lot of this stuff, somebody else's task, which is really what we're doing at the end of the day. And we're trying to make it somebody else's task with something that's going to be more automated and much more efficient than the ability to kind of operate these things in silos, which is what we're doing moving forward. So I think it maybe a touch the stove thing. In other words, people are running against the chaos issue right now. They're running in the complexity issue right now. They see the downside of it. They're unable to get things done at the speed they need to. There's backlogs that are starting to occur. They're having trouble adopting the technology that they need because of some of the operational limitations that are there. So if they've seen or felt the pain, it's probably going to be easier for them to motivate to move toward a standard vision, at least in my experience.
It's really being able to sell the what's in it for me in that vision, right? This is, pointing out that pain, like, hey, everybody's coming and complaining how they're not getting the environments they need or their costs are too high. And then being able to articulate, well, in this complete vision, right? Then we'd get those efficiencies, but we need the participation, right, of all the folks that consume those services to be on board with it.
Yeah, it comes down to it comes down to ops models and culture, your ability to adapt them in a certain way so they're going to have a greater chance of being successful with this new way of modeling things. And again, we're taking work away from them and we allow them to do a better job. And that needs to be communicated in terms of the processes and how you do that. Again, if this comes back to you have to do it our way or the highway, we're moving to some commonality standard, that's never going to work. We have to come to the fact that we're going to have a common set of services that exist above the applications and the databases to control governance, data, security, operations, things like that. So we need to figure out how to interface whatever you're building into that layer. And therefore, we take over the operations of the system and it becomes a larger component part of a greater whole of things that we're maintaining. And I think that people can see that. We kind of came from that maybe 30 years ago, got away from it. The technology was obviously much older at the time, but the ability to move into centralization of control and not repeating things and solving the same problems over and over again, people will lom onto that. I guarantee if you go to the water cooler right now in many organizations, the first thing they're going to complain about is I have to build something, I have to do something that somebody else has done, and I just don't know where they've done it. So I got to build a security system, build an operations layer, things like that. Well, they're going to build a silo by making that happen, where we're turning it over. We're letting the other group who's best equipped to do it to solve these problems on our behalf, and we can kind of get out of the game of reinventing the wheel.
Yeah, we do see this. We see this quite a bit, right? Where whether it be onboarding, let's say, new developers, and then them starting from they don't really start from scratch. So they're going to go out and look for best practices in pipeline creation or in existing code repositories. So being able to provide that to them, let's say, as a standard for rapid application development, has been of great interest, certainly to our customers. So they're just a faster onboard, faster time to value of those particular developers. One thing that you had mentioned was around operational efficiency, and we're going to talk about that more in a second. But I wanted to double click a little bit into when it comes to operational efficiencies not being realized, because I think this can be interesting for our audience. What are some of the things that your customers are seeing where they go, wait a minute here, the cloud in this case is not doing what we thought it would do? What are maybe some of those commonalities that you're hearing from customers?
It would be that it's costing way too much. We never thought it was going to cost this much. We never thought the ROI would not be returned to the business. You got to remember when cloud computing started out, 2009, 2010, it was new and innovative technology. There are promises being made about better operational efficiency and how we're going to leverage these systems. As we saw in 2022, much of that didn't materialize for many enterprises, and much of that didn't materialize for many enterprises because of self-inflicted wounds. So in other words, they did something incorrectly. They moved too quickly in the cloud. They didn't refactor things that needed to be refactored to take advantage of cloud native applications, weren't necessarily leveraging net new helpful technologies such as Kubernetes and containers as much as they should. So they're at a point where the symptoms would be this is costing way too much money than we thought. We're not getting to the operational efficiencies that we see within the system. There's not a lot of foreplanning and existing planning that's occurring around them. So these are issues that need to be solved. And it really kind of becomes as simple as that. So the symptoms would be normally when someone calls me, I just got a $200,000 cloud bill that I didn't know was coming. What happened? And then we can kind of take a look in a postmortem and take a look at what happened, inefficiencies, lack of planning, not necessarily accountability when it comes to cloud services, all these sorts of things that kind of come into play. But core to this is the fact there's no centralized command and control that exists above the system that's going to motivate them to move in the correct directions.
And we see, it's when we think about that, at least centralized costing models, certainly we're getting a lot of positive feedback from customers around the concept of FinOps, right? And interestingly enough, also a new term that we just heard for CFO was Cloud Financial Officer, actually, somebody who actually looks at their cloud spend. So that was a definition of CFO we just heard from customers over in Europe. So again, looking at how, are they getting the ROI for their specific cloud spend? David, thank you very much. I very much appreciate you being on the show. Fantastic insights as always into the industry, and would love it if you stick around, because if there's any questions online for David that you want to ask him, pick his brain on his multi-cloud experience, insights, and advice, please post them in the chat, and then we will bring you back at the end so that you can answer some of those questions live.
Happy to do that.
All right. Thanks, David. We'll see you in a bit. All right. Now, moving from the industry insights, we're going to go ahead and transition into one level deeper and look at some of our customer survey data in the multi-cloud. And to talk about this, we're going to welcome Rick Walsworth to the program.
Alexander, appreciate being
here. Hey,
here.
Rick. Good to see you. Good to see
you. You too.
Welcome to the program. And let's begin by, you want to share a little bit of your background and experience in the multi-cloud?
Sure. It's interesting being here in the Bay Area. I've been here at VMware for 4 years, but working in the Bay Area, I've actually been a partner, a supplier, and a competitor to VMware over the years. So I've been here on campus for many, many years, know the technology very well. My role is actually a fairly unique role. I run our product marketing group, but I spend a lot of time in our briefing center, talking with customers. And it's amazing because a lot of the comments that David made are echoed by customers coming in, trying to solve and address specific problems. And then the other part of my role is I get to work closely with our product management engineering teams in terms of taking some of that feedback and bringing it back into our development cycle, working with our product managers to be able to help them understand a little bit better about how we're not only positioning the technology, but how customers are using it. What are the core use cases that we use? So we try to bring those worlds together. And again, glad to be part of this show today.
And you're seeing some great insights from customers on their specific multi-cloud challenges. And we triangulate some of that with what David has said. We can probably bring up the visual now, and you can walk us through, right, these kind of top 3 areas and what you're hearing and how we got this data.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, it's no surprise that VMware's been going through a major transformation over the past couple of years. And what we really wanted to do was really try to understand what are some of the pain points, what are some of the challenges that our customers are trying to solve. And so we actually ran a survey and then actually a focus group after that survey with VMware customers. And again, it was smaller customers all the way up to large enterprises, just to be able to understand what were some of the pain points. And it was interesting that the feedback was fairly consistent, and it was kind of bracketed in 3 core areas that we have highlighted here. Better efficiency of my operations. How do I get better innovation, leveraging my infrastructure as an asset rather than something that people view as a cost center? And then how do I get better consumption of that infrastructure, move to more of a flexible consumption model? Because what we learned is that many more of our customers are moving from a CapEx, traditional perpetual license model into more of an OpEx model, where they are trying to adopt into that cloud operating model.
Yeah, this ties in very well with what David was saying, because you've got kind of 2 components there. The efficient operations, we said that multiple times when I was chatting with David, and that speaks directly to what you're seeing too, which is customers saying, yes, how do I make sure that this is as efficient as possible? And then kind of related to that, right, that flexible consumption is, let me use just what I need in order to achieve my business objectives, not overpay for things, and use new capabilities as they become available in order to help me advance my business objectives. Exactly. So on these 3 areas, where is VMware helping? How are we modernizing the data center?
Well, I mean, let's start with the operations part, because that's really where the rubber hits the road, relative to that. And I think David touched on a couple key points here, right? They want essentially a abstraction layer that gives them the ability to be able to manage their infrastructure, manage their resources wherever it's lies. So if it's on-prem, I have one tool to be able to manage it. But then when I move workloads into the cloud, I want to be able to use those same tool sets, the same skill sets, to be able to manage those cloud-based resources as well. So it does a couple things. First off is you can leverage the skill sets you have today. Most organizations have already deployed vSphere and vCenter and other products as well. So they're already very familiar with that vSphere model. So if I can find a way to be able to expand that skill set, leveraging vCenter as that core tool, but then moving it up into the operations team. So now the cloud ops team has the ability to be able to enhance visibility and control. It's going to deliver better business outcomes. And again, you're not so much focused on managing the infrastructure. You're trying to manage the business outcomes that the customers are looking for from the outset.
Yeah. And we've got to, if you want to pop up the next slide, right? So when it comes to where VMware is positioning and making available, right, to our customers to be ready and set them up for success, this is, right, VMware Cloud Foundation, having all these different components.
Right. And essentially what it does is it takes the best of our on-premises infrastructure, vSphere, vSAN, NSX, Aria for management, and it brings it together in a complete package. What it also does is it actually provides an orchestration layer that provides automation of a lot of the capabilities that would normally be manual functions, right? So now I can take things like my day zero stand-up. I can stand up infrastructure now literally by essentially assigning a cloud appliance that's building out the infrastructure. Then I automate the configuration of that infrastructure. And then it allows me now to be able to manage it from front to back with that. But the other important aspect of this, and this came out through the surveys and the focus groups as well, is that a lot of customers don't even understand where some of the security gaps might be. So how do they get a better visibility in terms of where security should lie within the infrastructure? Our stance is security should be intrinsic to the solution, right? So we build it into every layer of the stack. I can run microsegmentation, distributed firewalls within NSX, so my networking is covered. Within my storage layer, I have encryption. I have data at rest and data in motion encryption. Also, if I vMotion workloads using vSphere, I also encrypt that data. So as you can see, we've built security into every layer, but then also provide the framework to be able to automate delivery of that security so that it becomes a default of my operating model rather than something that I have to go and manually configure. By making it easier to implement and easier to execute, it actually makes it a lot simpler to be able to focus on the things that are important to the business rather than, again, trying to manage infrastructure day to day.
And this package of capabilities, the VMware Cloud Foundation, I key in on two words here that are just in the description: foundation, right? This is foundational in order to support what would be then a cloud environment, what is really actually a multi-cloud environment, because VMware Cloud Foundation, shortened down to VCF, right? VCF is an on-prem capability. And then the idea is to certainly then extend that out. So any capabilities there can go out into that multi-cloud environment.
Absolutely. And that is a core aspect to our multi-cloud strategy, where you're delivering this consistent infrastructure layer. Because as you know, when we run in VMC or Azure VMware Service or Google Cloud VMware Engine, Oracle Cloud VMware Engine, all of those cloud solutions have a common infrastructure layer. It's all based on vSphere, vSAN for storage, NSX, and Aria for management. So by having that cloud infrastructure layer on-prem and then extending that out into all of my cloud providers as well, what it does is it gives me the ability to take applications that I build on-prem. I can migrate those now into my cloud infrastructure without having to refactor or replatform those applications. That's huge from a time-saving standpoint. But also, if you think about it from an operational layer, again, going back to that efficient operations, how we started this conversation, I now have essentially one way to manage my infrastructure, whether I'm on-prem or I'm running in the cloud, I can actually manage that now through one set of tools. And I think we actually have a demonstration here queued up that allows and shows you the ability to be able to do this in real time.
Yeah, that's a great segue. Let's show that ability to see an entire infrastructure. Let's roll the demo.
So let's take a look at Aria Operations, which comes as part of the VMware Cloud Foundation full stack. Within this, you get a full view of the operational environment. So I get now a view of all of my VMware Cloud Foundation, as well as my VMware Cloud on AWS assets. If I had Azure or Google, I can also manage those from the same context as well. Now I go into my VMC US West. This is my instance that's running out of Oregon. Within that, I can now double click. I get a full view of all the assets within it. Plus I get any critical alerts and warnings that tell me I should take corrective action. Within this, I can now double click and expand on my software-defined data center, my SDDC. And within that, I do see all the elements that make up that VMware Cloud instance. And then it provides me the connectivity. Now what I do is I can actually open up and I can get a full dashboard view of all of the metrics that are managing this particular system. Within this dashboard, I have at a glance a view of all of the elements that are operating within the system. You see all my health status on the top. I'm running 100% across the board, so I don't need to pay any attention to that. I get my top alerts in the upper right-hand side. And then I also have essentially my KPIs that I'm using to be able to manage not only my web server, but then also the applications and databases within this environment as well. And you note here that I do have a read wait time that's higher than I want to. So I can actually go in and take corrective action to be able to double click and drill down on the aspects of the database that might be causing that. Could be a network problem, could be a storage problem. So it gives me the ability to be able to troubleshoot this in real time without having to go take additional steps, because it's providing me essentially guidance in terms of what I might need to do in order to protect and correct the warning that has come up within this particular dashboard. So as you can see within this view, I get essentially a complete view of everything within the network itself, and gives me the ability to be able to also go in and troubleshoot these systems using this dashboard as my primary interface for managing these systems.
Super impressive, because I think there's a number of folks in the audience who are jumping from console to console to console, trying to just even gather telemetry data on what is going on in their environments. And there, what you just showed was the ability to see it all in one place. In addition to that, the other thing that I looked at and just am blown away by is the ability to do some of that troubleshooting without having to bounce tickets, right? So, for the audience, if see if this sounds familiar, you send it to one, you send in the trouble ticket to one department, only to be told it's not our problem, it's not a network configuration problem, it's somebody else's problem. Go check with the ops folks. So then go check with this and go check, and before you know it, it's been a day, a couple of days, depends on how many people touch the ticket, and still no resolution. So exceptionally powerful, that capability.
Absolutely. And the other thing it does, aside from avoiding the finger pointing that typically happens in these types of situations, it's not only giving you better context in terms of what's happening, but it's also helping you understand why. Right? The conditions that happen, just before that, so that again, if it's something that may be, explicit within the network that may have other problems out there, it gives you enough information to not only correct this problem, but also to look in other areas to make sure that this isn't endemic across the rest of the environment.
Yeah. And I love how it ties together what David was mentioning at the beginning, needing that abstraction layer across common services, right? An abstraction layer across common telemetry information,
Exactly.
with regards to environments. The other thing, and you made a great point, being able to migrate applications from one environment to another. When we're talking about migrating applications, we're not just saying ones that are already, that are running, that are just the what one would call kind of the enterprise apps, right? The traditional enterprise apps. We're talking about Kubernetes applications too,
Absolutely.
right? Being able to have full Kubernetes applications on-prem and move them from one location to another.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I think one of the biggest innovations that VMware brought forward, roughly 3 years ago, right? It was 2020 when we introduced Project Pacific and, vSphere with Tanzu. And it wasn't just adding Tanzu and adding Kubernetes into the VM construct within a vCenter environment. It's actually changing the architecture. We re-architected vSphere and vCenter to essentially bring Kubernetes and Kubernetes models and DevOps-based models into the architecture itself. We updated all the APIs. So we're using Kubernetes APIs. So from a developer standpoint, they really don't care whether they're running on-prem or running in the cloud because they're using the same set of interfaces. They have the same set of tools that they're using in their cloud environment within these VMware-based environments on-prem as well.
Yeah, well, we just hit our 25-year anniversary, right? So we have a lot of experience when it comes to the traditional enterprise, on-premises data center. And in a poll we just sent out, you and I were a little surprised by this, but the poll we just sent out asking if customers knew that Kubernetes is included in vSphere, half didn't know that's right. Automatically the capability that you just described has been there since when? What was that?
2020. Yeah, March of 2020 was when we first started shipping vSphere with Tanzu.
Yeah. So for customers out there that are getting questions from developers or being asked, hey, we want to be able to use Kubernetes-based applications or develop to them, you've already got it at your fingertips. And actually, this is a good segue to your point number 2, which is rapid innovation. So tell us a little bit about that. What are the roadblocks for rapid innovation at customers? Yeah,
and again, a lot of the comments we hear from customers coming into the briefing center and from some of the customer conversations I have is that they have the DevOps and the platform teams and the developers coming to them saying that, look, we want to be part of this, we want to participate in this, but you need to be able to help support us with the right level of tools. And the challenge for a lot of organizations is that a lot of their skill sets were developed around vCenter or around VMs, but they don't have much experience within Kubernetes and containers. And so by bringing that capability natively onto that vSphere platform, what it does is it not only expands the skill sets of your team, because now your team is able to be able to support broad-based Kubernetes deployments at production scale, but it also allows you the ability to be able to bring DevOps teams in. And DevOps teams, they don't want to deal with tickets and they don't want to have to even talk to IT. They just want to be able to write code, check in their code, and move on to the next sprint. And so by providing an automated interface that essentially automates building of infrastructure as code, that was such a huge development, because now as a developer, I can essentially use declarative syntax within my YAML environment to be able to build my own Kubernetes clusters and never have to talk to IT. I can operate in my own little environment and be able to do this day in, day out. When I'm done with it, I essentially put it back in, that cluster gets destroyed, and I can now reuse those same resources for another project or for another team that's trying to access it. So it really is very much a cloud model using DevOps methodologies as a way to be able to automate infrastructure as part of that build.
Yeah, that rapid innovation definitely needs to be supported with the skill set as you just described, right? For platform operations, for building those environments on demand, for also then operational efficiency, going back to what David said, destroy them if they're no longer needed, so they don't cost money. So we've got, for those that aren't familiar with that capability, a fantastic demo of VMware here's cross-cloud services being able to extend the skill set, right, of the vCenter admins and SDDC admins, and just spin up environments for developers as well as break them down. So let's go ahead and roll that demo.
Perfect.
Cloud Foundation with Tanzu provides a consistent approach for running both virtual machine and container-based workloads at scale on top of your vSphere infrastructure. In Cloud Foundation, after a workload domain has been created, the cloud administrator uses the vSphere client to enable Kubernetes on the vSphere cluster. Once Kubernetes has been enabled, they create vSphere namespaces where they enable developer access and manage resource consumption. Developers then use the Kubernetes command line tool kubectl, to authenticate and gain access to the vSphere infrastructure, the same as they would do for any other Kubernetes instance running on any of the common cloud providers. Once authenticated, developers deploy their own upstream conformant Kubernetes clusters, referred to as Tanzu Kubernetes clusters, to run their container-based workloads. When hosting Kubernetes workloads, it's important that the cloud administrator be responsive to fluctuations in developer demand. As the number of developers increases, the cloud administrator uses the vSphere client to quickly create additional namespaces. This enables them to isolate teams of developers and ensures the cluster capacity is evenly distributed across those teams. When additional capacity is needed, the cloud administrator uses the SDDC manager to quickly create a new vSphere cluster where they enable Kubernetes and create additional namespaces. If additional capacity is needed for an existing vSphere cluster, the cloud administrator uses the SDDC manager to quickly add additional hosts to the existing cluster. If previously allocated infrastructure is no longer needed, the cloud administrator uses the SDDC manager to quickly delete the cluster in order to reclaim the capacity where it can then be reused elsewhere in the private cloud. In combining the concept of a workload domain with the advanced automation capabilities of the SDDC manager, VMware Cloud Foundation, together with vSphere with Tanzu, makes it easy to run Kubernetes at scale.
Yeah, that makes it look easy, right? But in some ways, that's what VMware does, because we've been doing the basics of that for the last 25 years, right? In the data center. And now it's about extending that capability out to a multi-cloud environment, which we're doing now and have been doing for a number of years. So just super impressive what can be done and how to create that rapid innovation environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And keep in mind that, what we just showed was running on-prem within VMware Cloud Foundation, but I can take those same operational models, all the skill sets, all the tools, those are the same that run in any of our hypervisors. So if I'm running on VMC on AWS, or I'm running on Azure VMware Service, the experience from the developer service standpoint is exactly the same. They do not have to change anything they do from an operation standpoint, because we've abstracted out the underlying infrastructure, allowing the ability to be able to move applications anywhere in your multi-cloud environment.
Yeah, and if we pop up that graphic, one of the screenshots from the demo, just the ability, and this kind of really highlights it. You've got that workload domain, which encapsulates all the different components needed in order to support the environment above it. But that's where platform ops or the administrator can dynamically create or destroy those and set guardrails inside of those. And even, as you mentioned, because the VMware Cloud Foundation capability, move it from on-prem to hyperscaler or to another on-prem. You got to evacuate one data center and move it to someplace else. You can do that, which is super, super impressive.
Yeah, because essentially what we're doing is we're applying a lot of the, tools that were native with vSphere for years and years, right? The ability to use DRS to be able to essentially, make sure that I'm scheduling the resources accurately. Use vMotion as a way to be able to move resources not only within my environment, but I could actually move resources using, tools like HCX between my on-prem and my cloud data centers. The other thing that's important here to understand is that, in addition to the underlying infrastructure, which is obviously core to what we do, we're also providing all the tool sets, the libraries, the things that the developers need, so that we're providing a complete environment within that namespace. But from an admin standpoint, if I'm a cloud admin, that namespace also includes the profiles of it. So I have storage quotas, I have networking requirements, I have security requirements. Those are built in, so the developer never has to think about it. They never have to essentially worry that they're not in compliance with any corporate guidelines for security, because it's built into the policy of the namespace as that cluster is deployed.
Yeah, and as they create those containers, right, then they've got their normal YAML. Doesn't matter for them where it lives. They go ahead and just execute, and then boom, the containers are created again within the guidelines of that platform ops team / administrators infrastructure team.
Yep, you got it.
Awesome. Well, let's touch real quickly on the third point, which was around flexible consumption. So on flexible consumption, and we can clear that slide out. tell us a little bit about what customers are looking for and what they mean when they say flexible consumption.
Well, we learned a couple things. The first thing we learned is that, that cloud methodology has really essentially been deployed on-prem, and customers are looking to essentially run a cloud on-prem using their IT organization. So what does that mean, right? That means I'm no longer using perpetual licensing, right? I'm now moving towards essentially a licensing model that was very much on demand. So I'm consuming resources as I need them and paying for resources as I need them. So that was the first thing we learned. But the other thing they wanted was the ability to be able to scale capacity on demand. So I want the ability to be able to add capacity using cloud as a way to be able to burst. And then when I'm finished with it, I can essentially bring that back down and use those resources elsewhere. But then the last one, and this was really kind of the thing that really opened our eyes and made us look hard at some of the solutions we're bringing to market, was that they wanted the ability to be able to use cloud as a way to deliver new services in real time. And a great example of that is disaster recovery as a service, right? If I want the ability, if I have 1,000 VMs in my environment and I really want to protect those 100 VMs that are running my mission critical applications, how do I provide a DR service that allows me to do so? Well, with the integration we've done with VMware Cloud and the VCDR solution, the VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery solution, we actually now have a way to be able to essentially integrate that with what I'm running on-prem and then use that hybrid operating model as a way to be able to do that. So essentially, once customers deploy the VCF instance on-prem with that cloud connectivity, they've got access now to a whole new set of services that allows them to be able to add in things like disaster recovery as a service, ransomware recovery. This is a huge pain point for customers that are worried about, what do I do if indeed I'm hit by a ransomware? Our stance is protect the infrastructure, leverage the security mechanisms that we built within NSX for intrusion detection and intrusion prevention. But then if indeed on the unlikely outcome that you do have a ransomware attack that does occur, I now have an air-gapped environment that allows me to be able to roll back to previous points in time to be able to recover from that ransomware event without having to pay the ransom, right? Because the bad guys, if they know you're going to pay, then they'll keep coming back. They'll keep doing it.
Yeah. So, and we've got a perfect example of how a customer can go ahead and enable that when they've decided sold on that capability. Now they want to consume it. Here's now a great example. So we'll go ahead and roll the demo of being able to consume it on demand.
VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery now supports VCF, VMware Cloud Foundation on-prem workloads in the same manner as VMware Cloud on AWS SDDCs or traditional vSphere on-prem environments. This expands the coverage of protecting VMware workloads for disaster recovery to VMware Cloud on AWS. With a VCF-based environment, you simply install one or more DRAS connector appliance VMs into the workload domain you wish to protect and register the vCenter for that workload domain with the SaaS orchestrator. This establishes a protected site, and the VMs within that inventory can now be protected and failed over to VMware Cloud on AWS in the event a disaster strikes. The protected site structure provided by VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery can be applied to individual workload domains or even across workload domains, depending on the inventory visibility and the protection policy granularity you want to establish in your data center. VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery now provides a great way to protect your VMware Cloud Foundation environments.
So there we were just really highlighting how once a customer identifies a capability that they want, they have a flexible consumption method in order to do that. We don't have time today, as we would love to. We talked about this previously, Rick, of going into the details of the value proposition for VCDR. But good news, we did that in episode number 4.
Right.
So with Yumi. And so that one is recorded out on YouTube. If you need a link to it, we can happy to drop a link to it in the chat, and or you can always ping me and I can point you in the right direction. But entire complete demo of how VCDR can help in terms of disaster recovery as a service. On that, I think we are running short on time, Rick. So let's go ahead and jump to our Q&A so we can try to wrap up within 60 minutes or roughly 60 minutes. So Leanne, if we want to welcome you to the show. Hey, Leanne. Leanne's our behind the scenes magic maker, and you've been monitoring the chat. Share with us if we've got questions that for the live audience.
Yeah, actually we've had some really good interaction. So thank you everybody for all of the great questions and really a lot of the chat going on. Hopefully there was one question about what David had talked about as far as costs. So hopefully some of the additional information he put out there was helpful. But for VCF though, Rick, there's a lot of questions on kind of getting started. So is there a way that folks can kind of get this started at home and really start understanding the power of VCF more themselves?
Well, certainly. As a matter of fact, we've got an instance called Holodeck that we use as a way to be able to essentially run an entire software-defined data center on a single server. And we've done that really for partners as a way for partners to be able to demonstrate it. But now what we've done is we're extending this out to customers. And with this Holodeck capability, it allows customers to be able to stand up essentially an entire instance that they can use in their own environments outside of production as a way to do testing, as a way to build custom scripts, as a way to be able to, essentially evaluate the software without having to deploy a full stack, within their production or their test environment. So if anyone's interested, I can certainly put a link in chat on how they can learn more about our Holodeck system and how customers have leveraged this in their own environments.
Yeah, that'll be perfect. Thank you. And just because this is recorded, all of the comments and everything are captured. So I'll be getting some show notes out and I'll make sure and get that link from you, Rick, and make sure it's in the follow-up as well. So
perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. And David, since you came back, was there anything else that you wanted to add to the question about that 2x? Somebody you brought up.
It's probably good to
5x cost.
Yeah, may repeat back the question since we're live, and then David, you can answer it live too.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, they were just looking for, they were impressed about a lot of the qualities and a lot of your ideas, and just basically looking for elaboration about the 2.5x cost. For example, what are the sources of the cost? Is it the customer or majority out of X?
Yeah, and those are from lots of studies I reviewed last year. And if you go to my InfoWorld blog, you can see a lot of the writings about cost inefficiencies, ROI. I think I posted one in the comment section as well, which was one of the bigger ones that I've done. That's an aggregation of information that we see coming from these surveys. And you have to remember that it's 2.5 times what, and normally it's 2.5 times traditional operations, or it's 2.5 times what they anticipated that operations would cost. That's typically in the cloud. So their expectations were here, and were one, and it costs 2.5 times as much. So it's an aggregation of lots of different data, things like that. I urge you to go read those articles. It kind of exploits, what different surveys talked about, where we're going wrong, where we're going right, and also ways in which you can fix it.
Hey, David, related to that, because I feel like maybe a good analogy would be when it comes to how organizations are doing in using the cloud. There's obviously maturity, right? Maturity of how to advance the operations, how to make them more efficient. Using a baseball analogy, do you have what inning are we in terms of, being able to use the cloud effectively? Because I think you had described, well, there were all these promises, right? And sure, those promises were made. They were hypothetical. Then you get into it, and all of a sudden, wait a minute, it's not exactly as we thought. There's this or there's that. So any thoughts on inning that we're in right now?
Yeah, I think we're in the third inning. I think
About the third inning?
Yeah, it's probably not even halfway there. You look at the number of applications migrated to the cloud, it's about 20 to 30% for most of the enterprises out there, maybe a little more if you put in the SaaS stuff. So that's a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of problems that need to be solved. And we're running into some issues now, as we thought we would. And it's a matter of, trying to figure out how to do those better and evolve more of an industry. But we're still early days, believe it or not, even though we're about 15 years in the cloud.
Yeah. And that might, I think that's another important point for our audience, which is this is not easy. The multi-cloud world is not easy, and it hasn't been figured out. I would struggle to think of a single customer that I've met with that said we did everything perfectly, because there are so many unknowns, right? Going into this new environment, new scalability, cost models, everything else, new development procedures, new skills. So for customers that are listening right now and they're in this challenge, they're not alone. But it won't be solved overnight, I don't think. Many innings to go.
Yep.
Totally agree.
All right. I know we're coming up on time. Yep. All right. With that, thank you both. We're going to wrap up. So David, very much appreciate all of your insight. Rick, also great insight. Thanks so much for having you on the show. Leanne, thanks for moderating and bringing the questions in. And let's do a quick recap. All right. So here in episode number 6, we had David Linthicum on, and he shared with us his insights on customers hitting that complexity wall, how that in turn manifests into cost overruns, right? Due to lack of visibility, as well as a lack of achieving those operational goals, efficiencies that customers were looking for when entering into a cloud environment. So multi-cloud is here to stay, and it's a matter of figuring out the right vision for a customer to have when it comes to multi-cloud, and then also executing on that vision so that you can abstract common services, abstract those commonalities, be able to then deliver certain common services across a multi-cloud environment and achieve that operational efficiency. And as David said, we're about in the 3rd inning there, so still a long way to go. Hence the multi-cloud expedition that walks through those different challenges. Then Rick came in and talked about the multi-cloud operating model, thinking about how and what products we have that can support efficient operations. And you saw demonstrations of VMware cross-cloud services there with Aria and the Aria Operations dashboard. Then supporting rapid innovation, right? Knowing that these Kubernetes is built into vSphere, and the ability to then use existing infrastructure skills and capabilities, right? To then extend that infrastructure, make it available to developers and support that rapid innovation. Ended it with looking at flexible consumption, something customers are looking for. As they have a need for new capabilities, they want to be able to enable that on their environments. And we showed you a quick preview of that with VMware Disaster Recovery, VCDR. All right. For the next episode, so episode number 7 will be coming up on July 26th. We're going to go deeper into Kubernetes management and thinking about how to simplify that Kubernetes management across a complex multi-cloud environment. If you missed any of the episodes, I did a recap at the beginning of this show, but we have the 5 previous ones. The show notes for this, as well as the different chapters and demos, will be posted to our tech zone area. So that's crosscloud.vmware.com. You can see it there. Hit the QR code. And we are just 2 months away, a little under 60 days from VMware Explore in Las Vegas. And a little teaser of some of the sessions we'll have there. First, being able to start your journey to Cloud Smart. Then looking at a Cloud Smart reference architecture and how our cross-cloud services can get you there. And then a session on mergers and acquisitions, converging clouds. David had just mentioned how many times customers find themselves just with a multi-cloud environment, but they didn't plan for it. So how do you handle that? How do you get that faster time to value? Plus, there's a whole bunch more coming. In that next episode on July 26th, we'll give you a additional view into what you'll be able to see and experience at VMware Explore in Las Vegas coming up in August. With that, I want to thank everybody for their time today. We did a pretty good job sticking to about 60 minutes, just a little bit over. So thank you very much. Hope you will join on a future episode, number 7, as well as the ones following that. Join us at Explore. As always, feel free to DM me over LinkedIn, and happy to answer any questions or direct you to anything you have questions on. With that, have a great day, and I'll see you in the next episode.